Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Frank Sanchez, the unbeaten Cuban heavyweight, advanced to 18-0 after a win over Nagy Aguilera. And this one ended in strange fashion, so we'll cover that off first because Aguilera really does deserve an Oscar for the acting performance. And then we'll get to a few thoughts about Sanchez and the what next because, I mean, they're kind of, where's he going? What's he doing? Kind of feels like much of a muchness in terms of the matchmaking. Where's the step-up fights that he needs to be in at this stage of his career? Because it all seems to have just be flatlining the same thing every time. But in terms of the fight, so this one was over inside 6 rounds. And it ended weirdly. Aguilera sort of took a punch, part to the shoulder and the sort of, glove, slid round the back of the head. Didn't really sort of seem to connect with the head in any real fashion. It was more, to the left shoulder. And Aguilera sort of backed off and took a few steps away. The referee says, warned Sanchez for the back of the head. And at that moment, as soon as that happened, Aguilera all of a sudden seemed to develop a case of, I need to fall to the ground and start crying and protesting and making out that something's happened here where Frank Sanchez should be disqualified. The replay clearly showed that this was a punch that didn't really sort of land in the place that Aguilera was claiming. It seemed to be his shoulder was hurt to some extent, but he was protesting about the back of his head. I can understand the shoulder because that's where the punch landed. So a bit of time passes, the doctor sort of has a look and all this sort of stuff. He's, on the ground basically crying, all this sort of stuff, and then it's off. Then we have it going to the scorecards. It's ruled that it's an accidental foul. Aguilera wanted ruled deliberate. He wanted Sanchez disqualified. Ultimately, though, he wanted a way out. The fight wasn't going his way. He wasn't going to get the decision. He had very little success in the fight, and he loses the fight. So on the cards through the 6 rounds, it was 60-54 on all 3 judges' scorecards. So, I guess the less we say about Aguilera, the better, because he's a journeyman who really didn't show too much ambition, except for when he got sort of clipped when it was the 3rd round. He was protesting about a shot, sort of complaining to the referee, and then Sanchez just unloads this right hand, follows up with a left, and rocks Aguilera. But overall, this was a fight where Frank Sanchez, he looked okay. But there was nothing sort of, wow, this guy's going to be a great contender. He's the next heavyweight champion. They were talking up Sanchez, something chronic on the broadcast, what he's been doing, what he's going to do, how good he looked in this fight. But I was thinking, yeah, he looked okay. It was against a journeyman with 10 losses who was a bit tough and a bit durable and took a few decent right hands through the first, 3 or 4 rounds of the fight. But ultimately, Aguilera was nothing special, and the performance from Frank Sanchez was nothing special. He sort of seemed to be, and there was sort of those Fabio Wardley vibes from the Eric Molina fight. There was a lot of sort of standing off, being a bit too patient and sort of admiring his own work when he did end up throwing punches, but there just wasn't enough work. I was thinking, why aren't you throwing more punches? You're throwing a lot of feints, but there's not a lot of punches or anything coming behind it. And he was guilty at times of headhunting instead of going to the ample body of Aguilera. There wasn't enough shots to sort of break him down. And at points, just sort of thought Aguilera seems to be taking the shots, the clean shots, quite well. But obviously, when the opportunity presented itself for a way out, Aguilera took it, and he was booed widely whenever the camera panned to him after the fight. But it was a case, I was just, it was a so-so performance by Frank Sanchez. The right hands, when he was landing them, they were pretty. The jab, it worked well at times, but there wasn't enough volume, wasn't enough activity. And yeah, I just kind of left a little bit underwhelmed. And there was a little bit of that in the Julian Fernandez fight, which he made a little bit tougher for himself, but he ultimately got a really sort of spectacular looking knockout. But you sort of step back and go, okay, he's 18-0 now. When are these sort of fights going to stop? Because I remember sort of thinking after the Jack Mulawai fight in 2019, and yeah, it was a couple of years ago, okay, it's time for a bigger step up. Ultimately, we got Joey DeWeco, which is sort of much of a muchness, and then it was Brian Howard, and then it was Julian Fernandez, and now Nagy Aguilera. And even before that, you had Jason Bergman and Victor Bisbal. So kind of we've had 7 opponents in the past, 3 years that it's just kind of roughly the same level. There's no noticeable step up that you go, yeah, that's going to prepare him for contender level fights. That's going to prepare him for the big time. They need to actually up the matchmaking and get him in a meaningful fight. Because at the moment, there's just this whole sort of treading water feel with Frank Sanchez. And in the meantime, he's not necessarily, in the performances showing that he's, this legit threat that it's going to topple the guys at the top. I like a lot of what he does, but it's just, a good performance, but not great. And there's just that flavour with some of Sanchez's performances. He does enough and not really anything more. I mean, off the back of that performance, does he really grow his own fan base? Maybe I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, sure, the crowd was cheering him on because of the antics of Aguilera, but I don't think anyone sort of goes away from that going, wow, he can, dethrone Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua. And at this stage, you want him in performances where he's looking good and making a name for himself. But it just kind of feels like it's misfiring here, and the matchmaking's not helping. But hopefully we can see, I mean, they were talking maybe 2 or 3 more fights this year, but hopefully it's not just going to be more of the same, because I think we've had our fill of these level of fights. This was a guy with 10 losses, didn't really seem to have much success, and credit for Sanchez for controlling the fight, but it's not like he was dominating to the point where you're just like, wow, it wasn't that sort of fight. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.